From one thing or another, everyone knows Eartha Kitt. Regardless of when you were a child, something she did likely impacted your childhood. From Catwoman in the 1960s Batman show,
foolish prattle. How can Batgirl be the best anything when Catwoman is around?
to Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove,
Pull the lever, Kronk. Wrong lever!
to Madame Zeroni in Holes,
You and your family will be cursed for always and eternity.
Vexus from My Life as a Teenage Robot, Old Lady Hackmore in Ernest Scared Stupid, Tina Mara on Mission Impossible, Agatha K. Plummer in Harriet the Spy, and much, much, much more. Or maybe you know her from her music. And there's a lot of that. Because if you haven't already picked up on this, Eartha Kitt was blessed with an incredibly distinctive voice. In the realm of music, she gave us classics like Santa Baby, I Wanna Be Evil, C'est Si Bon, and Where Is My Man? But it's more than likely that you don't know much, if anything, about the woman behind the voice, and the incredibly interesting life that she lived. Maybe you've heard about how she was stalked by the CIA after she challenged Lady Bird Johnson during the Vietnam War, or maybe you know about her deep friendships with Orson Welles and James Dean. These are only the tip of the iceberg. I've loved Eartha Kitt ever since I was first exposed to her as Yzma, and honestly, she's easily one of my all-time favorite entertainers. Like any great star, she used her platform and influence to try and help people in need as best she could, and never shied away from saying what needed to be said. She was brutally honest from her early years, besieged by pain and suffering, until her final days in 2008, when she left this earth still kicking and swinging. Please join me for a journey through the life of Eartha Kitt and the immense impact she left behind. Please note that Eartha experienced a lot of traumatic hardship in her life, in particular in her early years, including physical abuse. Please be aware of that when we go into this video, as I'll need to cover it. So with that said, come learn with me. But first, let's hear a quick word from today's sponsor, Wondershare Filmora. Whether you make videos for your job like I do, or just for fun, the most important thing in your tool belt is a reliable editing program with all the features you need to make a great video. It's extra important to me that the program I use is not only efficient and quick loading, but also easy to navigate, and Wondershare Filmora 11 continues to surprise me with just how easy it is to use. Wondershare Filmora is a video editing software with a wide range of powerful functions, and anyone can start using it quickly, even with zero editing skills. You can use Filmora to make videos perfectly suited to your unique audience, whether it be an actual following or just your grandma on Facebook. And all the super cool features come in handy to give a dazzling finish to basic footage. There are all the basic effects like transitions, filters, but there's also animated stickers, text, and sound effects. My favorite functions so far are the AI portrait effects, the green screen tool, and audio beat sync. The AI effects are so cool for dynamic movements, and it seems like there's a style for every vibe. Auto beat sync is super handy if you're looking at making a video montage set to music, which would be perfect for travel videos or TikToks in general. And then a solid and easy to use green screen tool is a must for any editing program, and the one in Wondershare Filmora is easily one of the simplest that I've seen, and I've used a lot of editing programs. Wondershare Filmora 11 is more budget friendly compared to other editing software, making it a great choice if you need a straightforward editing program. Head to my link in the description below to try out Wondershare Filmora for free for Windows or Mac to see if you like it. Thank you so much to Wondershare Filmora for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about the life of Eartha Kitt. Eartha Mae Keith was born in a town called North in South Carolina on January 17th, 1927, though she wouldn't know officially what year or day until much later in her life. Her last name, spelled Keith but pronounced Keat, would later evolve into Kitt. The name Keith was taken from the Swiss-German family who owned the plantation that Eartha's family was sharecroppers on, as was a common remnant of the era of slavery. Her earliest memory would set the scene of her childhood, as she would recall in her 1956 autobiography, Thursday's Child, "My first scene in life was a long, dark, dusty road. I could not see the end of it, for it just went down, 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 to end in what to me seemed like hell. I hung onto my mother's hand as though life or death depended upon it. My sister Pearl was in her arms. Mama began to hum as the sun sank into the ground ahead of us. After what seemed like years of walking with the spirits, Mama stopped. I could see her, tall and thin like a pine tree, as she stood among the pines. She laid my sister down on the ground and looked around for me. I was there, glaring at her in wonderment. Let's see. If any spirit comes after us, I'll dig a hole and bury myself. No, that won't be quick enough. I'll hide behind that big pine tree. No, it can see me. I'll get on my knees and pray so that God will give me wings to fly away. No, God may not hear me. If I go to sleep, will Mama go off and leave me alone? Will she remember that I'm with her too? Eartha's mother, Yzma Kitt, told her to stay there and watch Pearl, and then left. Eartha sat there in fear, desperately wondering if her mother would ever return, and thankfully she did. She reappeared a few hours later with fruit in hand that she'd stolen from a field. Mama was back, but this would not be the first time that Eartha would be abandoned. At the end of their journey, they reached Eartha's great-uncle's house, where Eartha's mother pleaded for him to let them stay there, but he wouldn't have it. "I don't want that yellow girl in my house," he kept saying. At this time in the South, yellow was a typical derogatory descriptor for mixed white and black folks. Eartha never knew who her father was, in part due to a cover-up by officials that she would discover later in life. Her mother was a mixed black and Native American woman who worked on a plantation, and the common belief was that she had been assaulted by the white plantation owner's son, resulting in Eartha's birth. This meant that Eartha's childhood was riddled by rejection on all sides, affected by unbelievable racism as a mixed woman of color, but still unwanted also by most of the black family in her life as well. As a result, Eartha believed from an early age not only that she was wholly unwanted, but that she needed to find some way to make herself wanted, because that love wouldn't come to her otherwise. Eartha and her mother and sister went on to stay with an old woman nearby who they dubbed the Stern Woman, or Aunt Rosa, where her mother worked to earn her keep and eventually, soon enough, became infatuated with, as Eartha said, a man that seemed to have come out of nowhere. The man courted Eartha's mother and was kind to Pearl, but noticeably ignored Eartha, and so, in order to run away with this new man, Eartha and Pearl were dropped off at the home of a different old woman who lived with her 2 grandchildren. Once again, Eartha heard the same refrain from the man: "I don't want that yellow girl in my house." Eartha was given many chores to do every day and was often bullied by the Stern woman's grandson into doing his chores too. One day, he tied Eartha to a peach tree and whipped her bare skin for hours. Oftentimes, when a child is subjected to physical and emotional abuse like this, they might start developing unusual coping behaviors. Eartha began coping by eating sand and clay and sucking on her tongue, and later by stealing and smoking cigarettes. One day, news came that Eartha's mother had given birth to a beautiful baby girl, but shortly after became deathly ill. She had become sick one night after eating dinner, which had been sprinkled with a red seasoning. Her stepdaughters who cooked the meal assured her that it was just a new seasoning, and after a few weeks of screaming and convulsing, Eartha's mother passed away, having been poisoned. She was buried a few days later, and her baby was passed over her grave several times in order to break the bond that might cause her mother's spirit to come claim her next. After months of working in cotton fields to earn her keep, Eartha was finally sent for by her Aunt Mamie Kitt, who lived in New York City, along with a box of new clothes. Apparently, someone had written to her aunt saying, "If you don't get this girl out of here, they're going to kill her." And Eartha was excited to leave, obviously, even though the family she lived with tried to scare her out of going so that they wouldn't lose their workhorse, as she recalled. Then they began to talk to me. "What do you want to go up north for? It gets so cold up there, people freeze to death. The buildings are so tall, they sometimes collapse and tumble down on you. The trains ride in the air, and they are always falling down on the ground. People live on top of each other. You never have enough room to move around in. You don't know when you are well off. Why don't you tell her you don't want to come?" They washed me in a tub of hot water, combed my hair, and made me clean as a whistle. All this was done in front of the fireplace, and I was as happy as a bluebird because I was going away, never to come back. And so Eartha hopped on a train northward and for the very first time saw a city, and more people in one place than she'd ever thought possible. Her aunt picked her up from the train station and took her to her apartment on West 143rd Street, and everything was brand new to her. The stairs, the buildings, the light switches, the bathroom, the gas stove, the radio, friends. Although she started getting bullied at school, it quickly passed when she learned how to fight back, and Eartha also learned, for the first time, that she had a power. People were enraptured by her when she read aloud to the class. She also learned that she had a natural talent for music. Many nights she would hang out with the Cuban kids in her new neighborhood and play songs on scavenged instruments, and later began to learn how to dance, slowly coming out of her shell and experiencing true community. But unfortunately, the joy wouldn't last. Over time, as Eartha grew older, her aunt began to resent the responsibility of caring for her. She stopped leaving her money for food or restocking the pantry, accused her of stealing her things, and wouldn't let her iron her already worn-out clothes. Whenever Eartha got a job to support herself, she was chewed out for not turning the money over. So she began staying out longer and later, attending every Cuban dance that she could. Eventually, because of this, her aunt kicked her out, calling her a tramp and a no-good, worried that she was gonna get pregnant, never mind that she'd never even been kissed before. Eartha was now homeless, but too proud to tell her friends or ask for help, so she got a job as a seamstress at a factory sewing army clothes, and gained friends there by singing songs while she sewed. After a back-and-forth crisis of her aunt making her come home only to beat and neglect her again, Eartha finally left for good. It was after this that one of her teachers, noticing that something was wrong, encouraged her to join the theater and sent her to a showing of Cyrano de Bergerac starring Jose Ferrer. Eartha was enthralled by his performance, suddenly filled with a drive to follow in his footsteps. I looked out of my eyes with a new light. I saw the world in a different color. Everything was rosy, lavender gray, and alive. The people were alive, the buildings swayed to and fro, the skies moved about, but I stood still in a daze of warmth. If I could do this, do the same thing he did, if I could give the feeling of happiness to people, or to anyone for that matter, that he gave to me, if I only knew how, if only I had the gumption, the chance. The wonderment of this kind of world began to haunt me, a world of giving and taking, a world of independence and fascination. I could do it, I kept telling myself. I could do that. One day, by chance, Eartha met a dancer from Katherine Dunham's dance troupe who was looking for the Max Factor makeup store. Eartha asked to meet Katherine Dunham, who happened to be looking for a few dancers. And soon she arrived at the school for auditions. Seeing the other dancers, Eartha became nervous, realizing that she really knew nothing about professional dance. But she auditioned anyway, figuring that she had nothing to lose, and went for it with everything she had, though convinced that she was doing terribly. Afterward, she sulked in the corner of the room until a woman came up to her telling her to be there on Monday at 10 a.m. She had won a scholarship. Eartha trained with the Dunham School for years, subsisting on $10 a week, which is barely enough to survive. She trained as hard as she could, but over time, it became apparent that Katherine Dunham sort of resented her for some reason. The company spent a long time performing in Mexico, where Eartha had a passionate fling with a stagehand named Charlie, who later revealed that he was engaged, after which she took off to Hollywood to set her sights on the silver screen. Unfortunately, Charlie broke off his engagement and came to California too, where he promptly became paranoid about people knowing that he was in love with a black woman. Charlie was white, by the way, to be clear. Eartha tried to break things off, but he stalked her and harassed her into staying with him anyway. So, Eartha made plans to go to Europe with the Dunham team, far away from him. She briefly stayed with her aunt again before leaving New York on the SS George Washington to Europe, and during that time, the two actually repaired their relationship, and at long last, Eartha felt accepted, like she finally truly had a mother. This would also be the last time she would ever see her aunt alive. A week later, Eartha stepped off the ship into England, and her life would once more change dramatically. Touring all over Europe, Eartha found herself in Paris in the company of a woman named Fred, who owned the famous nightclub Carol's on Rue de Panthéon. And now, Fred was actually an extremely significant figure in the history of Parisian queer nightlife. Fred was openly lesbian and presented highly masculine, and was well known to have a rotating cast of girlfriends, including Marlene Dietrich. Before the war, she helped run the famous lesbian nightclub Le Monocle. I'll talk more about Fred in a future video on the subject of Paris queer nightlife of the 20s 20s to 50s, so Fred had taken an interest in Eartha's performances in the Dunham shows and asked her to perform solo at Carol's at a time when she could still continue performing with the Dunham troupe. Overwhelmed and excited that someone so important had taken interest in her alone, she spoke with the agent of their tour, only to get yelled at and threatened with deportation if she tried taking on an outside gig. Eartha was furious and instantly left to write her 2 weeks' notice. Fred assured her that she would be fine and protected her from deportation, and so Eartha was on her own and solo at last. On her first night, she was given a modest white gown to wear, which Fred balked at when she saw it and exclaimed, "Mon Dieu! Where do you think you are going like that?" and ripped a slit in her skirt right up to the thigh. Then she was pushed out on stage, and she did so well that night that Fred promised her a job for as long as she wanted it. And she was extremely successful, rapidly gaining a wide new group of friends who cherished her. But then news came from New York that her aunt had a tumor and wanted Eartha to come home. She would be dead before Eartha could make it. Bringing her aunt's body back down south would be a surreal experience for Eartha, who thought she would never be there again. The last time she was there, she had nothing and no one and was seen as even less. But now she was returning wearing beautiful Parisian clothes and having become a successful performer. The entire town came to greet her when the train arrived, but Eartha still felt bitter, remembering how they used to treat her, and after the funeral, overcome with misery, Eartha fled back to Paris. It didn't take long for her to discover that while she was gone, Orson Welles had been looking for her everywhere. Yes, none other than Citizen Kane, the third man touch of evil, Orson Welles. He had been trying to cast Eartha as Helen of Troy in his new play, Dr. Faust, opposite him. Through this play, Eartha and Orson became very close friends and would remain so long after its run. And so, after a highly successful stint performing in Turkey with solo performances, Eartha returned to New York to continue her solo singing there with a widely advertised show at Levy en Rose. But for one reason or another, it was not well received. Her confidence took a major hit, and within weeks, her contract was cancelled. She began losing faith in her own skills, in show business as a whole, feeling for the first time in a long time that she had nothing. One day, walking miserably along Broadway, she was approached by a man who introduced himself as Jose Ferrer, the very same that she had seen all those years ago in Cyrano de Bergerac, the actor who had inspired her to pursue a career in performance in the first place. He told Eartha that he had seen her recent show and thought that she was wonderful. They walked some ways together, chatting. For a second time, he inspired her to go on. And thankfully she did, and soon enough she was swinging back up again. In 1952, she would be cast in Leonard Sillman's New Faces of 1952, a highly popular theater show. Eartha recalled her feelings after the show brought her fame at last. "C'est si bon," people would say when they saw me walking down the street or into a restaurant. I felt wanted. I was getting the love I had always wanted, though the love was in a different form than the love of mother and daughter or father. I was getting it the hard way, for I had to constantly prove myself in order to maintain it. It was the kind of love that one could not take for granted. One night, her success led her to the Ambassador Hotel in Hollywood, where she was to perform alongside other stars for a benefit with the King and Queen of Greece in the audience. She was told to sing whatever she was popular for, so she sang C'est si bon, I Want to Be Evil, Santa Baby, and Duke Ellington's Blues. A few days later, despite her performance being very well received by the audience, Eartha was told that the mayor had said that she was un-American due to her risque performance. Ironically, the media circus that followed this only caused Eartha to become even more popular. As her stardom grew, her health began to fail. She discovered that she was anemic, and due to her people-pleasing habits, still pushed herself too hard. All her life, Eartha Kitt sort of saw herself as split between two souls, that of Eartha Kitt, the beloved star, and that of Eartha May, the rejected, abandoned, unwanted, and unhealed child inside of her. The child that she left behind the minute she became a performer. In her second autobiography published in 1976, Alone with Me, she says, "Ironically, I think of Eartha Kitt as practically nothing. True, she is so very far removed from the basic nature of Eartha May that I can and do think of her in the third person. She is she, not me. She's a name on a marquee. I am constantly detached from her, and yet suspended within her and totally dependent on her for any survival. She has some of my better qualities, as a loving mother and as a friend to those who accept Eartha May, but I have none of hers. Eartha May psychs herself up to become Eartha Kitt for public appearances. She wears an impenetrable mental armor. Through her failing health, the medical malpractice of her doctor, and a crumbling relationship with a wealthy white man whose mother wouldn't allow her son to marry a black woman, Eartha suffered an emotional and physical breakdown. In the years following this time, she would reflect on it in relation to two of her most beloved friendships, that of James Dean and Marilyn Monroe, two friends that she cherished but long outlived due to their tragic, untimely deaths. She knew James better than Marilyn. They had met in Hollywood sometime in 1953 when James was filming East of Eden and Eartha was filming the movie rendition of New Faces. The moment they met, they felt like they'd always known each other or that they'd been friends in their past lives. They thought of each other like siblings, often taking long walks through Central Park and eating hot dogs and popcorn, sometimes in complete silence because they understood each other so well they didn't need to say a word. Sometimes Jamie, as Eartha called him, would call her at 4 a.m. to take a drive with him or just to talk. Unfortunately, James would be dead before the release of his third and final film, Giant. I'll cover this and their friendship more in my upcoming video on James Dean to accompany this one sometime next year. As for Marilyn, they met for the first time at a party where they were drawn to each other because they could sense in each other a shy, kindred spirit. It's like Marilyn was picking up on Eartha May instead of Eartha Kitt. From that day on, anytime they were at a party at the same time, they would go find a quiet corner and talk for hours. Like James Dean, Marilyn would frequently call Eartha at the early morning hours around 3 or 4 a.m. in a moment of loneliness, seeking connection. Eartha figured that, unlike herself, Marilyn could never differentiate between her own spirit and, as she puts it, the name on the marquee. She remembers a story where one day James Dean went into the studio commissary and saw a large photo of him up on the wall, and in a rage he tore it down, yelling that this wasn't his home and they don't own him. Though at the time, people thought this was strange, Eartha could sympathize. She understood that his rage came from him fighting to keep a grasp on his personal identity. From the late 50s to the 60s, Eartha became a staple presence on American television, most famously starring as Catwoman on the Batman TV show. And please, for the love of God, if you haven't seen her episodes, please go watch them. She is absolutely incredible in this show, and it kills me every time I watch it.
It will take just 20 minutes to do the work cut out for it, to cut you into a perfect pinafore.
This is Batman, Catwoman.
Oh. Speak of the angel.
The entire show is a goldmine of hilarious jokes and campy goodness and is well worth the watch, even beyond Eartha's episodes. I can't recommend it enough. Even if you hate superhero stuff. It's a classic. So yeah, this time things seem to be going great for Eartha. She got married and gave birth to her daughter Kit in 1961. Her daughter's first name is Kit, please don't get confused. Surely nothing could go wrong. Folks, it's time to address the Vietnam-shaped elephant in the room. Obviously, by this point, the Vietnam War was raging, and the US, as per usual, had decided to stick our dumbasses over there to cause all sorts of problems, and irreparably damage the country forever, yay. I literally don't even remotely have the time to cover the whole Vietnam War today, so just know that it sucked, and was wildly unpopular with the American youth at the time. Obviously. Like, the student peace protests were a huge deal. It was a crisis. Well, amidst the chaos, in 1968, Eartha received an invitation to join the Women Doers Luncheon organized by Lady Bird Johnson herself, the First Lady.
Crime is a grim subject for a pleasant meeting like this.
The meeting's subject of discussion was, why is there so much juvenile delinquency on the streets of America? Anyone's guess? Well, Eartha thought this could be a fruitful discussion and headed to DC. She had a lot of thoughts on the matter due to her on-the-ground activism and outreach work with youth groups, such as Rebels with a Cause. She expected this meeting to be serious and with the intent to make a change. Unfortunately, she couldn't have been more wrong. One thing on her mind going into the luncheon was the conversations she had with a group called Mothers of Watts, who had expressed frustration that the war in Vietnam was disproportionately affecting youth from minority groups, taking children overseas to die in an $80 billion a year war that shouldn't even be happening. As she entered the luncheon, she initially became frustrated that the other guests weren't taking the topic seriously at all, instead taking menus as souvenirs and chatting about gossip. Then, in the middle of the first speaker's speech, President Lyndon Johnson decides to make an appearance. He prattled on about how crime starts at home and we need to fund the police. Look how great that's going. So Eartha stood and asked about how parents could instead better support their children.
Delinquency across the United States, which we're all interested in, and naturally that's why we're here today. But what do we do about delinquent parents? The parents who have to go to work, for instance, who can't spend the time with their children that they should. This is, I think, is our main problem. What do we do with the children then when the parents are off?
The president replied that they passed a bill to fund daycares. Weird, since the topic was crime on the streets, not crime in the playpens, but okay.
The Social Security bill that just passed this year sets up millions and millions of dollars for daycare centers, whether that's approved by a bunch of men who are really not the best judges of how to handle children otherwise. I think that'd be a very good question for you to ask yourself and other women here, and you all tell me what you think.
Then he fled the room. The women in attendance began their discussion, but none of the suggestions for how to solve crime on the streets made any sense. One woman said we need to collect clothes donations. Others discussed planting flowers to beautify a highway. Some suggested better streetlights. One woman bragged that she fought crime by spotting a child on the street holding a rock that might be thrown, and she took it from him, scolding him, saying, "No, you mustn't do that. Naughty, naughty." Every time Eartha raised her hand, Mrs. Johnson told her to wait her turn. In her own autobiography, Lady Bird had a completely unmasked obsession with hating Eartha Kitt. She writes that she was surveilling Eartha's every move at the luncheon, expecting her to do something wrong, judging her at all minutes no matter what she did. Lord even knows how she was picking up on anything else happening in the room, given how much attention she was paying to Eartha Kitt. Well, Eartha finally had her chance to speak, and she spoke out about how Vietnam was negatively affecting the American youth. Enraged, Lady Bird stood up and exclaimed, "Miss Kitt, just because there's a war going on doesn't mean we cannot be civilized." Eartha then understood that many of these women never intended to have a serious discussion. How could they? Their husbands worked in the government, and it's the 1960s. Women in the US couldn't even have their own credit cards until 1974. It wasn't long after the incident ended that it became clear Eartha might be in danger.
It was apparently an embarrassing moment for Mrs. Johnson. Do you have any regrets about that?
No, I don't have any regrets about it at all. Why should I be upset by the fact that she was embarrassed? That's her problem.
She quickly flew home amidst the media scandal that was erupting like goddamn Mount Vesuvius, and soon enough, she was being tracked by the CIA.
I was on duty as an American citizen, as I feel I am always on duty as an American citizen. And if I am asked if I have an opinion about what I have been involved with, then I feel I have the right then to cast those opinions.
As a result, she was dropped from all of her contracts and engagements and found herself completely unable to work.
As a result, on the bottom of the CIA dossier, it says, specifically requested by Lady Bird and President Johnson, deface me in the United States so that I would be not seen, and therefore I'm out of work.
In later interviews, she often likes to say,
"He blacklisted you. He made it difficult."
No, I wasn't
for you
blacklisted.
To get work. What happened?
I was whitelisted.
And that's definitely what happened. If you read her CIA dossier, which describes her as a sadistic sex nymphomaniac, it has a very similar tone to every other CIA dossier that was following any black activist or public figure at the time. In fact, it turns out the government had already been keeping tabs on her ever since she gained stardom in the 50s. Eartha Kitt wasn't just a threat because she spoke out against Vietnam. She was inherently a threat by being a successful black woman, and so Eartha and her family fled back to Europe, as it was now one of the only places she could have any semblance of a career. Despite how difficult her life had become, Eartha was still determined to use her platform to make positive change. In 1974, she was asked to perform in South Africa, which she only agreed to if the audience was not segregated, something that was unheard of during apartheid. She also intended to raise money to help build schools there for the Black African children. It would be almost a decade before Eartha would be freed from her exile when, in 1978, she was asked to appear on Broadway in Timbuktu. When she was subsequently invited to the White House and welcomed personally by President Jimmy Carter, she knew that she was free to come home. She returned to her career in the US, now divorced and living alone with her daughter. They had a nice home in Beverly Hills with a beautiful garden, chickens, pets, friends, and books, as she wrote. In her later years, she would return to the silver screen, appearing in the films I mentioned earlier in this video. Most notably to me personally, Madame Zeroni in Holes, and Yzma in Emperor's New Groove, which she clearly had the time of her life recording for.
Has but one punishment: death!
Despite the suffering, she maintained an extremely positive outlook on life because she had no regrets. But if you watch any interview with her where she recounts her memories, it's visible just how painful these things still were for her, often getting choked up and coming to tears when thinking about them again. Her daughter, Kit Shapiro, reminisces on this in her own autobiography, Eartha and Kitt. Let go of it already, I would say to her, especially as I got older. That's enough. How long are you going to hang on to this anger and pain? The mistreatment that you suffered from this person or that person in the South? I think the honest answer was that she couldn't let go of the past. I think she was afraid to. Letting go would have meant that she wouldn't be who she was anymore. Why would I want to forget, she would ask. Why would I want to let go of something that was such an integral part of the foundation that made me who I am? Yet, she was not someone who had been defeated by the adversity that she had faced. Not in the least. On the contrary, if anything, it actually gave her a sense of pride. It served as incontrovertible proof of how incredibly strong she was inside. She wasn't going to let them defeat her. She wasn't ever going to let anyone do her in. Besides, even though she held on to the pain and it was easy for her to recall what it had been like back then, as clearly as if it were yesterday, she wasn't bitter. She was never a bitter person. Kit Shapiro has always put a big emphasis on just how good of a mother Eartha was, even with her busy schedule and fame. She loved Kit dearly. More than anything in the world, her daughter became the most important person to her, and all of her struggles only made her an ever more open and accepting person. This could be as ground level as her firm belief that all living creatures are allowed to exist and deserve a place in this world. Bugs have a purpose. Just because you don't like how they look doesn't give you the right to kill them, she would say. And it also meant that she was a staunch advocate for the LGBTQ community and Jewish folks.
I would think that we are all rejected people. We know what it is to be refused. We know what it is to be oppressed, depressed, and then accused. And I am very much cognizant of that feeling. Nothing in the world is more painful than rejection. I'm a rejected, oppressed person, and so I understand them as best I can, even though I'm a heterosexual.
Your sexuality doesn't threaten them.
No, neither does their sexuality threaten me.
But her strength didn't mean that she was immune from her pain spilling out. One night after performing at Carnegie Hall, Eartha was signing autographs when suddenly a woman got her attention, yelling, "Eartha May, do you remember me? Your mother married my father." At that moment, when Eartha May was called on instead of Eartha Kitt, something inside of her snapped. She broke down in tears, screaming, "What do you want from me?" until her daughter pulled her away and got her into a car. Eartha had never known how she would react when confronted by her past in person until that moment. All of these years of strife, much of it at the hands of men who wanted her sexually but hardly respected her as a person, led her to finally realizing that she's just fine on her own. Even though her stage image was still that of a sex kitten, and she played around jokingly with the man-eater image, including with her famous 80s song, Where's My Man, in real life she couldn't care less what men wanted from her anymore, resulting in probably my favorite interview clip of all time from this 1982 Christian Blackwood documentary called All By Myself, The Eartha Kitt Story.
If a man came into your life, wouldn't you want to compromise?
Stupid. A man comes into my life and I have to compromise? You must think about that one again.
In a way, while this attitude certainly protected her from more pain and abandonment, and rightfully so, it also had the reverse effect of causing her to overbearingly rely on her daughter as the sole source of comfort in her life. At almost every event, Kitt was her plus one. Well into adulthood, Kitt would travel with her all over the world for work. To this day, Kitt does a massive amount of labor to keep Eartha's legacy alive, and I really respect that. I did try to get in contact with her to chat for this video, to no avail, but oh well. It was worth a shot. Kitt says in her book, the result was that I didn't ever choose to go off on my own path. I always remained attached to my mother. I never lived more than a few miles away from her and saw her almost daily throughout my entire life, which is ironic given that I grew up with a woman whose main motto, more or less, was never be dependent on anyone. But I felt that she somehow needed me more than I needed her, emotionally for sure. I wasn't ever going to go very far away from her anyway, and I sure wasn't going to pursue any career that was going to take me away from her. That's how I finally ended up with the one job that worked for us both. Being my mother's manager, and that was a career, one that brought us together even more. Though Eartha passed away 14 years ago, Kitt essentially is still her mother's manager. In late 2008, the family discovered that Eartha had stage 3 colon cancer. If you saw her in her last performances that September, you would never have guessed she was that sick and dying. She had an immense level of energy and spirit right until the very end. The moment she finally accepted this disease was going to take her life, she deteriorated quickly. It was like having realized that she couldn't perform anymore, the fight left her. As Kitt recalls, Eartha Kitt was gone, and once again, she was simply Eartha May. The last few weeks of her life, she spent at home being cared for by Kitt and a hospice nurse, and then on Christmas Day 2008, she suddenly began screaming. She quite literally left this earth screaming at the top of her lungs. Kitt screamed back, telling her it's okay, she can go. And so, Eartha Kitt fell silent, and she was gone. On her rise to stardom, Eartha once said, "I did it with wit, grit, and a sense of humor, and I never took up a stick to beat anyone to get to where I wanted to go." And I think that sums it up pretty well. Eartha Kitt's impact on culture has been immeasurable in ways that I think most people don't much realize. She has impacted people's lives on the ground through her youth outreach work and activism. She spoke out against the Vietnam War at the height of her fame when it was still wildly unpopular to do so. She utilized her power as a famous black woman to challenge racism both in and out of the entertainment industry, and she gave millennials and Gen Z some of the most iconic fictional characters of our childhoods. Coming from absolutely nothing, rejected and abandoned, to living a life where her biggest mission was love and giving is incredibly inspirational and part of the reason why I've loved her so much. As she once said in an interview,
"The people adopted me. My greatest family are the people. The people. That's why I say when anybody asks me, what do I think of myself? I think, Besta Margariosen, thank you very much. You adopted me when nobody else did.
Thank you for learning with me about Eartha Kitt's incredible life. She's one of my all-time favorite entertainers, and I hope that now you love her even just a little bit as much as I do. So, until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and as Eartha always said, don't panic.